All right, welcome to the climactic final episode of Untangling Braid. We are going to talk about the famous twist ending, the meaning of the princess, the atomic bomb, all that stuff that people talk about. We're also going to talk about all the themes that people don't normally talk about when they just give their quick takes on Braid. So we're going to talk about the dramatic twist ending, but we're also going to take all of the pieces that we have been examining in detail in the previous episodes and put them together to understand the overall story of the game and how that relates to the end of the game. So in addition to being the final episode of this series, it should also be a good overview of Braid overall. If you have some friends who are like, I would love to learn about why Braid is great and what makes it such a great game, and I would be happy to spend 1 hour doing that, but maybe not like 6 or 7 hours, then you can send them this video, because this will hopefully be kind of a summary of the themes of Braid in addition to covering the famous twist ending. So before we end up here in the problematic attic of Braid's World 1, we're going to just talk a little bit about the structure of the worlds that we've seen so far, right? So the player's experience, you start in this tutorial world 2, and then 3, 4, that you go up in linear order, and then here you get this like dramatic plot twist where it's like, he's been questing after the princess, but, maybe, he was like she didn't want to be rescued, or he was some kind of stalker or something. So that's like the narrative experience of the player, is like he's doing this quest, and then he gets to the princess, and then it's like all the assumptions are overturned and stuff. But the numbering of the world tells us a lot. And I think the worlds are arranged as they are to create a kind of good emotional arc, but the numbering of the worlds hints that there's the order of Tim's experience is different, and that carries quite a different message. So I feel like the correct order to read the worlds, as it were, is in like countdown order, right? So you start with 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So it's world 6 has all these themes of like uncertainty and hesitance. He's like adrift. There's like slowness everywhere. It feels the most mature, so like it has this emotional tone of like this adult mix of themes, and there's kind of like a somber or alienating tone, and that feels closest to the kind of destructive, revelatory, like hidden away secrets stuff of the ending. But this is actually where the game starts, right? And why is it's in countdown order? Because like, dude, it's like an atomic bomb countdown, but also it's it's a game about time, so of course things are going backwards. So we're counting down in reverse. But World 6 is the start of his story, and where he's the furthest from the princess. He's just beginning. He's not yet have the quest for the princess. This picture, I like to think of it as like Tim is like first seeing the ring, the moment where he's lost in this society, and all these different potential values that feel shallow to him, like the billboards up here, and then he's just catching the scent of this hope of transcendence. Then in World 5, it's all about it's about decision. The story in World 5 is this like domestic dispute. He's like he's suppressed part of himself, has been kind of growing stronger and stronger, wanting to go out and find the princess, but he's been suppressing it, keeping the ring in his pocket in order to fit into a normal life. But then he gets up and says, I've got to go find the princess. He like leaves his family in the story, leaves behind all of his normal stuff to go pursue this crazy quest. The text references giving a final kiss, hosting a travel bag to his shoulder. He walked out the door. And in this picture, we have two Tims, right? So we have this guy right here. He's like drinking the soda that was advertised in the billboard up in the top left-hand corner here. This is like Tim living his ordinary life, and then we have this Tim in the background who's like getting ready to board a plane or something, just like going off and doing something crazy, and then he's following the princess, this kind of like glowing character who's just a little bit off screen. So there's World 5. He's like falling into the kind of pursuit of the princess as like a symbol of truth and a symbol of transcendence and enlightenment. And it's also fall in World 5. You have all these falling leaves, and then that fall transitions to winter in World 4, and then spring in World 3 and summer in World 2. So that just reinforces the idea that the way to read the connection between these worlds is in countdown order. That time is going, starting from World 6 and then kind of counting down to the final bit. So then in World 4, it's like he's made this decision in World 5 to break with his past life. Now he feels like he's on this positive trajectory. He's getting closer and closer to the princess. The text talks about how there's this improvement day by day, and it's always very ambiguous. There's kind of, some of the text makes it seem like, well, did he already know the princess in the past? And now, but in World 4, 5, and 6, he's like, I have to go and find her. She's out there in the future. I'm like, tracking her down by the anticipation, by like my idea of her or the scent of her or something. World 4 says, this improvement day by day takes him ever closer to finding the princess. If she exists, she must. She will transform him and everyone. Couldn't he find the princess now, tonight, just by wandering from place to place and noticing how he feels? So there's this kind of mix-up of memories that starts to happen in World 4 between the future and the past. Like how close is he to the princess? Then in World 3, he's closer still. The mixed up memories, now he's thinking he remembers her or already was with her or something. He remembers that leaving the family behind in World 5, but thinks of it differently. He says he kissed her on the neck, picked up his travel bag, and walked out the door. Now he's going back to, tell her how it was bad, but also how it was good. This is kind of, there's like the incidental themes of each world come through in all the different perspectives. It's not a fully coherent story. And in this world, you have kind of like a grass is greener on the other side, right? He wants to, Tim, he's always looking outwards, and this will become a theme that gets brought up in the epilogue. He can only see the outsides of things. Tim wants to like go on some grand quest to obtain like this fact, this like secret knowledge or experience that's going to transform his whole life. But then when he gets there, it's just a piece of knowledge, and he thinks, oh well, the mystery was always somewhere else, or like the culmination of all my desires is somewhere else, because Tim can't really be content with the present moment. He has this grasping, questing. He's like a video game Mario guy. He's like, he wants to coin collect and stomp on the Goombas and stuff. So he's kind of always fixating on some external thing that he wants to possess. But that's not really the right direction to look in. But Tim doesn't realize this when he's in World 3. He's just like, getting more and more all about his quest. He starts to have this story about like, there was like this isn't yet to the horrible and evil monster, but this is like reminiscing, like, oh, I had this thing in the past or something. And then in World 2, this, in the player's experience, this is like the most optimistic world, right? It's like sunny, it's like, there's like just flowers and bunnies and stuff, and there's like it's like a nice summer day. It's all these green hills. It's like Mario or Sonic or something. But in the context of counting down these worlds, World 2 comes off as like delusional. It's like he's gone in for this crazy storybook narrative where he's like literally the knight in shining armor, and he's gonna come save the princess from from the horrible and evil monster. So, you get to this text, and, he's like, oh, sure, like, I made all these mistakes, and now the princess probably hates me and stuff, but, that's that'll be no problem. She'll just forgive me, and we'll be together, and it'll be perfect forever. So in the context of the rest of the story, World 2, rather than the kind of storybook feel that it has initially, feels like Tim is kind of like going a little crazy, just like so obsessed with this quest, and has bigged it up to like become his whole life, and that it's going to be this amazing thing with no downsides that is going to revolutionize everything. So that's a little bit about how I see the plot of the different worlds working out. And yeah, I guess. So all that said, that brings us to World 1, where we finally have this encounter with the princess that Tim has been kind of like remembering, anticipating, you know, that the whole rest of the game has been triangulating around this whole time. But before we dive into that, and I've just been talking about all this princess mythology here, right? Like, you know, Tim wants to just go back and be like Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and, you know, have this kind of mythical world of like Goombas and castles and stuff. But it's important to remember that this is just one layer of what's going on in the story of Braid, right? The Witness is also like this kind of a multi-layered levels of story that are kind of true in different amounts of fictionalness. So first of all, there's a story of Tim and the Princess, which is like a fantasy story where maybe they're going backwards in time, like Merlin or something. But then that's always part of a metaphor about like human relationships, and, you know, Tim is kind of like being like abusive or obsessive, and so that's you know, there's a layer which is like a commentary on people's real life behavior, that like you shouldn't be like this in actual relationships with people. There's also a layer that's a commentary on the fact that this is the classic video game hero quest. You know, Mario's going after Princess Peach, so it's like Zelda and Link, Ico and Yorda. That it's saying like this trope is problematic. It's you know, it's a bad way to portray things. And then of course there's the metaphor of the princess as, which is kind of like the highest and most interesting thing that's going on in Braid, as the princess as transformative scientific knowledge, right? And this has been like a hidden theme. Like, so far we've just been like, okay, so Tim is like doing, you know, there's this storybook stuff, there's kind of some sci-fi about like what if time was different, but basically there's been all these books on the one side, and then on the other side has been this like very like scientifically minded puzzles where you're trying to use logic and reasoning and thinking about how time works and cause and effect in order to get all these puzzle pieces. And those two, like, you know, why is this puzzle game have a story about a princess? That is like not clear even through the ending, not clear until we get to the epilogue text, and then we get, of course, the text about the Manhattan Project and about other scientific landmarks, and it becomes evident that the story is, you know, that the princess is referring to this idea of enlightenment and transcendent knowledge, and also that the story fits with the gameplay in the sense that as the player goes through the game, they start out with this kind of easy, happy, nostalgic exploration of things, but then they've got to get like more and more serious, because the puzzles get harder and harder. And as you get down to like the last hardest puzzles that you're having a tough time figuring out, trying to complete each world, maybe trying to get the stars, then you get into this kind of like obsessive scientific mind space that's just like what the game is talking about in its, you know, in its story aspects, where you're observing things very carefully, as Tim does. You're experimenting, you're going back to previous solutions to try and figure things out. The kind of stars and speedruns are like the epitome of that, where, you see the it's kind of rewarding players who are like really breaking the bounds of the simulation, applying their knowledge in really carefully orchestrated ways to do these impossible seeming things, which is just like how, you know, the physicists who are like learning like Maxwell's equations and stuff, and they're just, you can have this tiny detail like static electricity, right? People knew about static since forever, since, you know, as soon as the first man walked across the first carpet, but it turns out that hidden in that like tiny anomaly in our understanding of the natural world was this amazing understanding of electromagnetism that could create all this technology and lead us to all these impossible seeming things. And of course also the creation of the atomic bomb is similarly like that depends on understanding of fundamental physics and quantum mechanics, which no normal person would ever have any reason to look that closely into the discrepancies between the way the world works and the sort of like Newtonian mechanics that we had before. But the people who look really closely with this Tim-style scientific mindset and investigate every little discrepancy are sometimes going to turn up something huge like that. Then another layer of what's going on is we kind of got to remember all of these adventures and quests and mythological and scientific themes and stuff, they're all kind of happening in this make-believe land. The like literal layer of the game is like Tim's in his house, you know, and then he goes into these imagined worlds where he has this kind of like contemplative, like thinking about different ways his life could have gone, dreaming about alternate ways that time could work. He's thinking about his regrets. He's thinking about future possibilities. So there's kind of weird dual perspective here where on the one hand, the game is condemning the actions of like Tim, the cold-hearted, obsessive adventurer who's trying to like track people down and, you know, and like understand the universe at all costs. But then also there's like Tim, the relaxed philosopher trying to live the good life, you know, in his living room. And I feel like the game takes a more kindly stance towards that side of Tim, where he's just this complicated human being. He's like all of us. He's hanging out. He's thinking about the connections between things, and trying to live the examined life. Of course, one thing that I haven't been able to cover as much in this video series is also like the various game design statements, like, hey, you know, what if we made a game that was structured like Italo Calvino's Invisible Cities, where every different world was a different perspective on how the mechanics could work, instead of just adding difficulty or just adding, you know, little like variations. Or, you know, what if we had this, like there's all kinds of super micro details about puzzle design, which I think are probably fascinating to puzzle game designers, but which I can't speak to as easily because I don't spend all my time thinking about game design, although I spend a lot of it thinking about game design. And of course, the very existence of Braid is sort of like a meta statement about the value of making a game with all these things. This is one of the things that I like most about the game, is that it's taking all these themes, all of these complexities, all these different layers, it's packaging them together in one thing, and not in the sense that like games like Skyrim have a lot going on because like they just put a lot of stuff in the game and they just like, you know, there are like 300 people working on it, and if you want to write a story and make a little fort and have your own little corner of the map in Skyrim, then like knock yourself out. But instead, packaging all the things together to create a cohesive work where all the elements that we're talking about support each other and kind of coexist and have these relationships like a mandala or like a composed painting or a song or something. So this is the element that really made me fall in love with Braid in the first place, and with other like beautiful complex things, like you know, Go to Lesher Bach, a book that I've probably mentioned in previous episodes, or The Witness, or maybe some of the other games that we'll cover in future episodes. So just the fact of creating this and putting all the effort into it is kind of a testament to what Jonathan Blow thinks is the value of this kind of artwork that ties together so many different themes and tries to create a sense of cohesion. But with all those layers accounted for, let's talk a little bit about the art up here in the attic. So from the sunset, right, we started out there with this like fiery sunset and this like deep sense of depth in the screen, and that has since settled into dusk and then into night, right? So we have this like beautiful scene with all this depth. It's also like it's a city. It's Manhattan probably. Then it's like twilight. And then we go through here. It's kind of easy to forget because players spend most of the time just hanging out in here trying to complete all the puzzles. But then up here, everything's like settled into this calmness of night. So just another kind of scene of time passing. But it also kind of gives the sense of, it's a little bit more troubled, right? I mean, it's kind of normal to just hang out on your couch trying to live the good life in the evening. But being like up into the wee hours of the night in the attic is a bit more of an unusual activity. The attic is, it's like a forgotten place. It's hidden away. We've got like knocked over chairs here. We've got like a lampshade on the floor. Either it's here because like either all the stuff is messed up because he doesn't come up here very often. Like, he's suppressing the memories that he keeps up here. Like people keeping secrets in their attic, like skeletons in the closet. Or maybe they've been like thrown around, right? Like maybe he's like angry and violent and he's like storming around up here thinking about some mistakes that he's made in the past or some traumatic event that he wants to hide from the rest of his kind of like his like perfect relaxed home here, like it's, I mean, he could stand to make the bed, but otherwise this is like this very kind of beautiful little abode for thinking and contemplating things. This seems like more tumultuous with this. He's got like papers on the floor here. Then the other items in the attic here, we've got a video camera up there, which I think is tied to the ideas of memory, because of course you might record past events and then replay them. But it also ties into the mechanic of this game's world of the reversibility of time, that events are symmetrical and you have this tide and riptide going on, because famously in film you can play film backwards and then watch all the forces of cause and effect, which are still doing their thing, but they're doing it in reverse. If you want to see more on that, you can watch the Christopher Nolan movie Tenet, of course, which is a whole movie that is playing around with the idea of filming stuff in reverse and watching the usual cause and effect, kind of like things still happen, but in this crazy, unpredictable way. And finally, we have this desk here. We've got a lamp. This almost looks like a sculpture of a face or something. Like he's like modeling some clay, but I don't know. I could be wrong about that because the art isn't that detailed. We'll have to wait for the anniversary edition to figure out what exactly this is supposed to be. Maybe it's like Tim introspecting or something about consciousness. I don't know. But that's about all that I can make of the attic. So now we are finally here in the clouds of World 1, where the text starts to give us... It actually doesn't want to give too much away because it wants to save some of the dramatic realizations for when we enter the world and have that experience, the classic Braid experience of figuring out how time works in this world. But we get a lot of detail about Tim and his motivation. So, at a cafe on a bright plaza, most customers sit back, feeling the warmth of the sun, enjoying their cold drinks. But not Tim. He barely notices the sun, doesn't really taste his coffee. For him, this corner affords a good view of the city, and in the teeterings of the passers-by, in the arc of a shopgirl's hand as she displays tea to an interested gentleman, Tim hopes to see clues. That night at the cinema, fictitious adventurers lunge implausibly across the screen. The audience here is mixed. Some are patrons of the cafe, now sitting excitedly in the plush chairs, eager for another new flavor, for distraction from the boredom of their easy lives. Other seats hold fishermen and farm workers, hoping to forget their toils and rest their hands. Tim is here too, but he is scrutinizing the gloss on the lips on the screen, measuring the angle of the plume of a distant helicopter crash. He thinks he discerns a message. When the cinema closes and most of the audience strolls down the plaza to the south, Tim goes north. And notice the extra spacing here around this book. People like Tim seem to live oppositely from the other residents of the city. Tide and riptide, flowing against each other. Tim wants, like nothing else, to find the princess, to know her at last. For Tim, this would be momentous, sparking an intense light that embraces the world, a light that reveals the secrets long kept from us, that illuminates or materializes a final palace where we can exist in peace. But how would this be perceived by the other residents of the city, in the world that flows contrariwise? The light would be intense and warm at the beginning, but then flicker down to nothing, taking the castle with it. It would be like burning down the place we've always called home, where we played so innocently as children, destroying all hope of safety forever. So naturally, there's multiple things going on in this text. We have our hints. Tim barely noticing the sun, not really tasting his coffee. This is the idea that he's kind of blind to the richness of sensory experience. He's totally disconnected from the concrete world and the here and now. He's like obsessed with the abstract. He's fixated on his quest for like absolute truth, and he thinks that this is something transcendent and separate rather than something that's immanent and accessible. So as you might be able to tell from these videos, I myself am a very nerdy person. I'm not very in tune with my sensory experience or social relationships or, other kinds of ambient situational experience like the passersby and stuff. I'm sort of a OCD, always focus on details kind of person. So I find this passage very, very relatable. And I think I found, even though I've only kind of dabbled in meditation and I'm not like an experienced meditator or anything, but I found learning about some of the basic mindfulness techniques and stuff like the Sam Harris Waking Up app to be very powerful for this reason, because I so easily am kind of like disconnected from the direct experience of life, and meditation is a way of reconnecting with that. So he's looking at all these clues, the arc of a shopgirl's hand, teeterings of the passersby, and that continues in this next paragraph about the cinema. So of course, it's not really about cinema. It's about it's going to be about games. It's or at least about any kind of entertainment. So partially we have something here. We'll get back to the clues thing, but the audience here is mixed. Jonathan Blow is sort of criticizing the audience for games or the audience for all entertainment. There's the people who are eager for new flavor, for distraction from the boredom of their easy lives. These are just like, they think of themselves as being cultured, but they're not like seriously seeking ultimate truth. They're just seeking novelty, right? Like I kind of think of myself as a cultured consumer of video games, but most of the video games I play are not like Braid and The Witness and stuff. I'm just playing them to, see the new adventure game and stuff. And I like making the connections and like, this is, it's interesting how they did this mechanic, or like, it's interesting how the sequel improved on the previous game in this or that way. But those aren't really like serious pursuits. They're distraction from the boredom of my easy life, right? Then there's these other folks who are a little bit more sympathetic because like they work hard all day, and entertainment is a form of relaxation for them. But they're also not. Again, it's like there's the entertainment, the content of the entertainment itself doesn't matter. It's this kind of shallow thing. If you think about, like, again, in the context of video games, like maybe like the guy who's working all day at Walmart for minimum wage or at Amazon or wherever, and then, he just comes home and he wants to play some Call of Duty with his friends and the online multiplayer and stuff. Like, you wouldn't criticize that kind of guy and be like, oh, you have such poor taste in video games, like that's just a way of getting by in the world and having a good time. So both of the groups of people are sympathetic. They're both doing something good. appreciating culture is good, relaxing and just enjoying life is good. The art is helping them do that, but neither is doing what Tim's interested in and what Braid as a game, as a cultural product, is interested in. So what are the clues that Tim is looking at? The gloss of the lips on the screen, the measuring the angle of the plume of a distant helicopter crash. I think these also make a little bit more sense in the context of video games than in movies. Like the gloss on the lips brings to mind like specular reflection and like subsurface scattering and all the kind of rendering tricks that video games do as a video game programmer. Jonathan Blow has like worked on all these 3D engines and stuff, and I imagine that when he plays video games, just like I do, I like recently got a new graphics card, and so I'm like scrutinizing like, is the reflection off of that leaf in the sunlight like really like a nice HDR reflection? Is it ray traced, or am I just getting the trashy screen space reflections, that kind of thing? So a little bit, and similarly the helicopter crash plume is like fluid dynamics, or that might be used to simulate the fire and smoke of an action scene, so this is stuff that's hard to make in video games, but it's also the reason it's hard to make is because it's simulating real life, right? Like specular reflection is all about how light moves around, and the kind of fluid dynamic simulations that you need to make smoke and fire look really good have to do with these complex Navier-Stokes equations of like how particles interact in large groups. So this is kind of pointing to like Tim is like looking to the media as a reflection of reality, or trying to find some fundamental truth, or in particular kind of like a fundamental physics truth, which of course is not what the cinema movie is trying to do. It's trying to portray a helicopter crash or a romantic kiss or something, but that's the kind of those are the clues that Tim is after. He's like pursuing the world of the abstract and fundamental physics in particular, because he thinks that's where the transcendent knowledge is, but of course we'll learn in the epilogue is a bit of a mistargeting, or at least too narrow of a focus. Then we have this final bit when the audience goes to the south, Tim goes north. Of course, this is the first hint to the reverse time symmetry mechanic, which is then captured in this crucial line: people like Tim seem to live oppositely from other residents of the city, tide and riptide flowing against each other. So I thought this is just such a beautiful image that captures a lot of things. The image of the symmetrical tide and riptide, like causality flowing from past to future, and then also maybe from the future to the past in reverse, like Tim living backwards in time. It's also just evocative of the way that waves in the ocean will combine and overlap. It's like this super dynamic space. There's like everything is in flux, everything's like moving. It's a lot like the visuals of this room in the clouds in Braid, where you have the kind of floating, kind of pulsating fog and air. This perpetual protean change of everything. This like sines and cosines, like it's this world of motion and overlapping patterns and things, which are all, especially in the ocean where everything's totally sine and cosine, is like trying to get to the essence of time, of like change over time and what that means and how we experience it. This is also another great example of that dual side of Braid's story, where you have kind of a science fictional side of like what if time really was in reverse, and then you have a side that's about human relationships and what our actual lives are like, just like in Invisible Cities or Einstein's Dreams, where you have all of these different fantastical things, but they're kind of metaphors for different aspects of the real city. So here we're like imagining this crazy sci-fi concept, literally like that movie Tenet, where time is going in reverse direction for different characters, maybe for Tim and the princess, And then we're connecting that to this very human sense of isolation and alienation that Tim feels, and that maybe that Jonathan Blow probably feels, and that maybe the player of the game might feel, of feeling like you have different values and goals from all the other people, from the ordinary masses of the people at the cinema. That Tim is like off on this quest, and that just causes everything to be kind of like backwards and upside down for him. And he feels like he's working against the other people, or he's, not, he's living oppositely from them. So then we get, for Tim, this would be momentous, sparking an intense light that embraces the world, a light that reveals, like, what's going on here? Why are we materializing castles? What does this refer to? It's cool prose. I think this is also like atomic bomb imagery in particular. The use of the phrase materializes is a reference to, so in an atomic bomb, right, the reason why it's able to unleash so much energy is because some of the mass of the uranium literally is transformed from mass into pure energy with the famous E equals mc squared equation, energy equal mass times the speed of light squared. And so this, so in the atomic bomb, you have mass turning into energy, but of course Tim is living in reverse time, right? And so it's all this intense light, all the energy is coming together, and then it's materializing, it's turning back into the mass of the uranium. It's like, for Tim's experience, it's like the bomb, it's like this horrible wasteland, and then there's like rumbling, and then there's all of this light and heat that starts building up, and then it all comes together in one place and then like materializes into the bomb. And for Tim, that moment is like the total apotheosis that he's imagining. It's like this revelation of something being created from nothing, a total enlightenment that would be transformative for his experience of the world. But of course, for the people living in the regular world that's flowing normally, that's the bomb exploding and the castle disappearing in this burst of light and flame and radiation, and then just leaving behind this wreckage and wasteland. All right, so now we see the gameplay reflection of that, which is this amazing reverse time world where you see we have Goombas flying upwards off the screen, and they're dead as they're in flight. Then they hit the spikes, which normally kill the Goombas, but when the corpse rises up and hits the spikes, it's revivified, then flies upward in a kind of reverse fall, and then walks backwards, and then eventually comes to its birth, right as it's gets absorbed into the cannon, and we can even see the little trigger, the fuse on the cannon that's burning itself into existence. It's kind of pulling itself together, just like I was talking about of the matter going into energy, and sort of uncrisping itself as it goes along. We have the music going backwards, of course, and in later levels we'll see like the smoke of the fire is like going in reverse, rushing into the surface. So then we can also do this funny thing. If we get in the way of the Goombas, then we'll interrupt their life history and create a sort of paradox, I guess, where the Goombas must not have been killed by the spikes, because they were killed by Tim here. And so again, Tim, instead of killing the Goombas, can bring them to life. And in normal life, if you change someone's childhood by maybe telling them something new about the world or something, then you can change their later life. But here, it's changing the end of the Goomba's life that makes all of its earlier life totally different, because it's being kind of move from the endpoint rather than from the beginning. So now we have a situation where there's Goombas that fly up from this fissure and into this cannon here. But now in the previous room, when we interrupted the path of the Goombas and changed their earlier life history, they had just always been there. But now we have Goombas that will change their or it'll like give them a different life history origin, and they'll fly over and join this other canon. And of course, the game very cleverly sets up the timing of the fuses and everything to make it appear as if it had always been that way. So if I just rewind, it just seems like the cannons randomly go off, the Goombas come out, and everything is just running totally according to plan. There's no like weird paradoxes or hackiness, and it's kind of startling the extent to which Braid is able to make this work. Of course, it requires a very constrained level layout, but make this work and create like a consistent history even when the causality is going in reverse. So, like the game can always find new excuses for where the Goombas came from and make it all work out in the end. No titles on these worlds, but we've been getting an image of a flower closing up, which is another kind of motif of time going in reverse, because of course flowers tend to start as little buds and then gradually open more and more. The world is also getting more destroyed, right? So this is the same level layout as previous, except there's all this gnarly lightning in the background. The ladder has collapsed that we were previously able to climb up, and this shows us something new as well, which is that we have this phenomenon of being able to bounce multiple times on the same Goomba, which is a sort of paradox that the game is not able to cover up for, right? If we go forward, it's like that Goomba should definitely be keeling over on the first bounce. But the game can't get around that one. So at least not without, I guess, having like tons more Goombas fly up from the bottom of the screen at every jump. So in a way, this level is sort of like the game admitting, like, yes, this is all has to be carefully arranged behind the scenes, and this backwards time world could never be perfectly consistent in every way. But with that, let's go onwards to the climactic twist-ending final level of Braid, which is also the titular level. So we have a environment of all these bricks and stuff, his castle ruins, the princess being in another castle. The evil knight comes down, the princess calling for help. He's angry that she jumped out of his grasp. Screams for her to come down here. We get this fire going across the screen, which is a classic sort of platformer level style that we haven't seen before, which is the like locked screen movement, which of course is resonant in the context of Braid, because the like forced advancement of time. Yeah, I mean, it just ties into time as a theme. It also, of course, forces the player to execute some elite platforming skills. Although it was just interesting from a game design perspective, it's not like an impossible puzzle challenge. It's a platforming challenge. This is common in puzzle games, I would say. Like, if you think about the ending of Portal, the scene where you take down GLaDOS is also not a super difficult final challenge. It's more like you jump around and do stuff because the game wants to let you have momentum and get excited. You're watching the princess on this upper level as you do all this platforming down below. Yeah. So we'll see, like, up where the princess is, these trees getting blown over by the like shockwave wind of the forest that destroyed the castle. The princess here ends up kind of jammed up and pushing against the door. I guess she will. She doesn't like bite the dust and fall off screen. So then we're coming up and activating all these levers just in time, and then she is activating further levers like turning off the fireballs down here so that we can make our way through, which gives it this wonderful kind of cooperative type feeling. So we gotta open that door, and then she'll open. Now this is an interesting one. She's opening this lever, which, just like in those previous levels we're in, gives an alternate history for the Goombas' lives, right? So previously the Goombas were, you know, all coming out of the cannon on the left, which means they would have to walk all the way over there and then walk back, which is a big no-no because it's hard for us to get past them that way. But now that the princess has opened this door, then the Goombas will have another available life history, a simpler one, where they were just fired out of the cannon on the right, and then they won't have to walk back through that narrow corridor, so we'll be okay, and we'll be able to make it through. Alright, now we get to the princess's house. Probably won't be able to see this on the video, but her address is 6980, which I've been told is a reference to the house in the David Lynch movie Mulholland Drive, which is a film that is even more hard to comprehend than Braid, so I don't know that much about it, although I did attempt to watch it. Yeah. Got a modern house here, and this is kind of interesting. So we've had all this castle, knights and castle stuff, but as soon as we get to the actual princess's house, then things start going very modern and start looking more like Tim's house, which is the beginning of the theme of like, hey, maybe this is kind of like a crazy storybook delusion or something. Like, don't get carried away by all of these, you know, stories that you put yourself at the center of as the protagonist. Like, the princess is, she's this concrete person. She's out there, she's doing things, you know, she's living her own life, like she's having thoughts and ambitions and things that you don't know about. And there's this whole other world here. Got a wine cellar here, very reminiscent of the boss fight scenes where you have the evil Goomba going around down here, and then Tim is climbing up above and releasing the chandelier onto the evil monster, which of course is symbolic of what's going on here, with Tim in the cast of the villain. And also just seeing this like amazing, it's a nice kind of final thing to see the chandelier come together in reverse time. You almost sort of forget that you've been going back in time because you've been so caught up in like, oh man, like it's the final story and stuff. A lot of the opening of the levers, like that has nothing, it gives no indication that time is going in reverse. And then there's that one with the Goombas that I talked about, but you really have to be kind of thinking hard about that. Basically just, you know, pull the lever and go, because time is of the essence. But when you get here and you see all this like beautiful physics going into reverse, right? Like, just like I was describing the atomic explosion in reverse, like everything is just this still kind of cratered wasteland, and then there's this like rumbling, and then everything like jumps together and then assembles and materializes in midair. So that kind of clues you in, like, oh, wait a second, wait, what? Like, the princess is, like, undropping a chandelier from underneath me? Like, what's going on here? And then, of course, there's no end to this level. We get out to this beautiful garden. It's not just a modern house, but a positively modernist house, the way it's up on those stilts. And we're able to go up here and hop onto this fateful platform, which resets all the fire and stuff, and gives us this sleeping princess, and a scene of like, this is the start of the twist, right? Like, oh, did Tim, he's just like standing outside her window with her asleep. Like, this feels more creepy than like a heroic rescue from knights and dragons and things. We have all these symbolic items from the world of Braid, which suggests that maybe, that maybe Tim was like in a relationship with the princess, or knew her, and then is constructing the fantasy world of the 6 worlds full of all the puzzle levels based on the imagery of the things in her house and stuff. So just on screen here, going from right to left, as we'll soon be doing once I start holding shift, we have a little Goomba right at the corner of her pillow, and then the little dinosaur that greets us at the end of each world next to it. We have an empty star above her head from the stars that we collect throughout the world. We have a funny little kind of like bunny cutouts or bunny themed curtain or something. We have a wooden drawer that kind of recalls all of the wooden furniture of World 5, although of course houses have a lot of furniture in them. We even, over on the far left side of the screen, we have like a statue figure of which matches the silhouette of the boy from World 6, right? The boy in like shorts who was like confused and bewildered at all the different life paths that he could take. And we'll see as we go through the rest of our house a few more items. So once you start rewinding, I guess it's no big deal. You can just rewind and not. But you're just stuck here because you can't go outside. The wall is too big to jump up. But once you rewind far enough that you get back into your the time period of the original run, then it'll kind of lock in, and you'll only be able to rewind at a rate of 1x. As it replays the cinematic story that we've experienced in reverse. So now, of course, we get the famous twist. She's dropping the ladder on us instead of raising it. A few other items in this house, though. Up in the very top right, the Mona Lisa painting has changed to an absurdist parody, Dadaist parody of the Mona Lisa from the 1920s, where she has a mustache. There is a tiny cannon, like a decorative cannon of one of the Goomba cannons, just sitting on her desk there. There's a table with a wine glass that looks very similar to the painting of World 2. Then there's a bench and a little stone building, which is very reminiscent of the castle from the end of World 2, where we first meet the little dinosaur, and he tells us that the princess is in another castle. Here we even have the final funny correspondence is that purple like decorative pot right above Tim is actually very looks a lot like some of the foliage from World 3. Some of the like tropical like mushroom plant foliage has that same zigzag shape, and then the purple decorative pot is sitting on top of a little drawer which has another zigzag motif which resembles the stone ruins from World 4. So the princess just dropped a chandelier on us. We're like, okay, what? And then she's lowering this ladder, which we could have used to climb up there and be together with her. And then what do we do but slam shut the platform here as if to trap her, but she makes it underneath just in time. The platform slams shut, and see, the game has this problem where when you're playing forward, the princess rushes forward as fast as she can and then ends up slammed up against the door, pushing against it like she wants to get away from the fire and keep making progress. but then that means that she's like waiting around after just missing the door in reverse, and so it changes the animations on you. Instead, it isn't a perfect replay of things in reverse. They sort of change the animations to accentuate the story and make it more, add a different kind of color of interpretation to it. So now, instead of her kind of trying to push and get through the door and looking anxiously at the fire, she's the platform has caught the corner of her dress, and she's like pulling at it, trying to tug to get free. We pull off this crazy, impossible jump as we go backwards, of course. Then we have all these platforms. Now she's activating fireballs to shoot at us. We're trapping her again with the platform. She's dropping us into the fire, but we jump out just in time. And then again. And then here she's calling for help now from this formerly angry prince, who now has a little bit more of a innocent and helpful looking animations as well. Again, all the animations have been swapped out. He says, "Come down here," in friendly green text instead of red. And then catches her and whisks her off as valiant knight should. So here we are back at the beginning of the level, which is now totally empty, and we're just here all alone. I forgot to point out that the knight looks like Tim. Like, he's got red hair and stuff. You can rewind in the YouTube video if you want. But he's like an oversized, hulked out kind of fantasy version of Tim, with, I think, even like a little tie or something. So there's kind of, and that also goes to show that the story can be read both ways, right? So again, the player's experience, just like the player's experience of the world, starts with World 2, but it's kind of more appropriate to read them starting from World 6. The player has this experience of like a dramatic plot reveal of like, oh, Tim was the bad guy all along, and he was creeping on the princess, and really the knight was good, and that is like true, but also simultaneously the game is genuinely interested in this idea of the story that can be read in multiple ways, and having the the experience of when things are going in reverse in time, then all of the kind of emotional experiences are reversed, right? Like if you lose some money and you feel sad about it, but then if you were like Merlin and you were living in reverse in time, then you'd be happy about it because you'd have just gained some money. Or if you met someone for the first time, you'd just be like, "Hey, how are you?" Yeah, and then maybe you go on to have a long and complex friendship with them, and they become your best friend. Then if you're living in reverse time, then that first like idle hello becomes this tearful goodbye, where you're never going to see them again, and have all these really strong emotions, where previously, going forward in the time, you wouldn't have any. So that the knight he's bad in one direction, he's good in another. Tim is good in one direction and bad in another, and he's kind of like both at once, this savior character and this predatory pursuer character. But that's the ending of Braid. This huge twist, this big kind of it's the game's attempt to give you this kind of, it's been bigging up the princess for so long, and then drops this big kind of revelation of like, oh, it's actually this complex mess, and maybe everything is the reverse of what I thought. Drops it on you, and it's the big moment of Braid analogous to a more gameplay-ish big moment of The Witness, and both of those are, I think there's a quote from Jonathan Blow from some interview early on after the release of Braid where he said that the game was an attempt to model enlightenment, like to demonstrate in micro scale what the experience might feel like. And so having the big sort of like BioShock style plot twist is like this giant realization, just like the realizations that the player has had when solving all of the puzzles. And Braid is almost trying to be like a drug-like like concentrated dose of that experience of like insight and like suddenly everything coming together and the pieces fitting and understanding some bigger picture. I guess the hope or working theory behind that being like, well, maybe if you get a lot of practice at having moments of discovery in all these different domains, like story moments of figuring out cross references between the text and and like revelations about the princess and stuff, and gameplay moments of determining the way that time works and solving some tricky puzzle, or realizing that you can escape the bounds of the screen and capture stars and things, that maybe that will kind of give you this diverse portfolio of like what it feels like to to like make a discovery or experience insight, and then you'll be able to kind of get on the scent and follow that trail of awe and inspiration, and find some kind of bigger moment necessarily outside the game in everyday life. So the game is, there's like the epilogue will kind of condemn Tim for his actions, but the structure of the game, just like how I was saying, it looks more kindly on Tim the philosopher in his house than on Tim the like single-minded quest hero in the fantasy story. In the same way, the whole structure of the game is kind of saying like, yeah, like track down the insight, get the facts. There's going to be one big giant enlightenment moment that makes your whole life. And then the story is like, no, don't do it. It's destructive. It's bad. You won't like it. But after the final level, we're still, for all of that eventfulness, very much in the dark about like, who is the princess? What does it mean? And I've been just like not being very careful about spoilers, and I've been alluding to the fact that she's like symbolized this kind of like scientific truth or enlightenment, but that has been basically not grounded in any of the stuff we have read so far, but it all shows up here in the epilogue, and so this text is going to be very fun to go through, because this was also, for original Braid players, part of the huge twist ending, because they wouldn't have known about any of these like high-minded themes until I get to this very end bit here in the epilogue. The text in the original worlds is just this kind of Italo Calvino stuff about like relationships, and then it's about time, but that's different from like the epilogue is a lot like literally about an interest in physics. Yeah. So this first one. The boy called for the girl to follow him, and he took her hand. He would protect her. They would make their way through this oppressive castle, fighting off the creatures made of smoke and doubt, escaping to a life of freedom. I think this is like literally an Ico reference, right? It might be a little far-fetched, but this is one of the more artsier takes. And I don't know when Ico came out. It might have been like, I don't know. It was probably like 2003 or something. So that's plenty long ago, before Braid came out. But it's one of the major rescuing a princess stories in gaming, and one of the more sophisticated and artsy of them, as opposed to like Mario and these other things that seem like they're just like made, I don't know, long ago, and they kind of just threw the story in randomly and stuff. So we have the boy calling for the girl to follow him. This is like a constant mechanic in Ico. You're always saying like, en toi, and then like dragging her all around, holding her hand. There's literally a button in Ico that you use to grab Yorda and tug her around to wherever. He would protect her. They would make her way through this oppressive castle. Aiko takes place in a castle, fighting off creatures made of smoke and doubt. All of the enemies in Aiko are indeed like shadowy demon creatures made from smoke or shadow or something, and escaping to a life of freedom. The boy wanted to protect the girl. He held her hand or put his arm around her shoulders in a walking embrace to help her feel supported and close to him amid the impersonal throngs of Manhattan. They turned and made their way toward the Canal Street subway station, and he picked a path through the jostling crowd. So then this is the connection to the real world, right? Manhattan, I don't know, I presume the Canal Street subway station is a real place. I don't know if that has a special significance. But this is like a real relationship that someone is having, where they want to feel protective, not by like literally bashing smoke demons with sticks, but it's like, it's saying that the video game fantasy story of heroism of Aiko is reflected in kind of like a real life kind of like protective, possessive, paternal attitude that a boyfriend might have toward his girlfriend, or a husband toward his wife, or etc. To help her feel supported and close to him, thinks the male voice that's kind of speaking all of these perspectives. But we, for the first time, don't have to just take that perspective at face value, because we have this very fun secret mechanic that reveals this hidden text. So this whole game, of course, Tim has been on screen. Well, I guess except for if you're tracking down stars. Tim's been on screen, and then and we have the star moments where you get literally outside the box and kind of break the simulation and are able to access these hidden rewards. But now we have a different kind of being outside the box, which is like there's these pieces of geometry that like overlap. And this is a big no-no in platformer design, because of course if you can't trust like if the floor is really the floor, then it just makes the game into a huge mess. But for this ending, there's a couple of like hidden places where you can jump and like hide Tim, and then it's like when Tim isn't there, right? Because he just has his own limited perspective, like his male, perhaps sexist perspective, and also like his perspective of being obsessed with scientific truth and stuff like that. But then when he's off the screen, we can get this other look at things. And so we have kind of like the princess speaking for herself for the first time in this secret hidden text that Tim doesn't have access to, but we as the omniscient player do. His arm weighed upon her shoulders, felt constrictive around her neck. "You're burdening me with your ridiculous need," she said. Or, she said, "You're going the wrong way and you're pulling me with you." In another time, another place, she said, "Stop yanking on my arm. You're hurting me." So this is the arm weight upon her shoulders and feeling constrictive is the Manhattan thing, right? He thinks he's being protective and making her feel close to her, but to her it just feels like ridiculous need, like an emotional need to express this protectiveness and closeness, And she's like, "This is your thing. This is not providing a benefit to me." Or you're going the wrong way and you're pulling me with you, right? It's kind of controlling. Like maybe she doesn't want to take the Canal Street subway. She wants to like go home to her own apartment or something. But in another time, another place, so then this "stop yanking on my arm, you're hurting me," of course it's like an escalation to like violence, as opposed to like just like this kind of annoying versus like "I disagree with you on this important decision" versus like literally "let me go." But it's also going to the exaggerated fantasy world of Aiko, where you drag Yorda around as like a game mechanic. And it does, in fact, in Aiko have this kind of like brutal, like inverse kinematics or something that makes her seem very dragged around. So now, just what I was saying about not being able to trust the floor if you have bits of geometry that that aren't solid, or like you don't do a clear job of distinguishing foreground from background and stuff. Here, it pulls that joke where you're ready to walk out to the end and jump off, but actually the floor gives out partway through. So we end up down here. The game pulls another wacky joke by just having the only visible text on screen be "water-starved monkeys," which kind of provokes this immediate like disgust reaction of just like, what the hell? Like that's a very random thing to mention and very gross. So we've got to come up here to figure out what's going on. Oops. So we've got, "He worked his ruler and compass. He inferred. He deduced. He scrutinized the fall of an apple, the twisting of metal orbs hanging from a thread. He was searching for the princess, and he would not stop until he found her, for he was hungry. He cut rats into pieces to examine their brains, implanted tungsten posts into the skulls of water-starved monkeys. So I think it's very intentional that it has this hanging off text because you see this bad thing, the water-starved monkeys, and you're like, what? Who could possibly want such a thing? Why would someone just torture animals or whatnot? And so it emphasizes the single-mindedness of this scientific quest. So all of these things in the next screen, we're going to get our one and only reference to the atomic bomb. I mean, not really one and only. The game has been kind of off and on making like little references throughout. But the reference to the atomic bomb about which so much has been made. But if you're just on the atomic bomb theory, then it seems like it's this very particular story about like maybe Tim was on the Manhattan Project or something. But this paragraph opens it up, and some of the subsequent ones open it up to be like, no, this is about understanding the universe. It's about having this big picture perspective. The atomic bomb is one very poetic and strong illustration of that. But this is kind of a through line. It's a bigger philosophy, and the princess represents something bigger than just a particular device or a particular theory invented at a particular time, but instead is this underlying spirit of like the essence of the universe or something. So working his ruler and compass, that's like the methods of mathematics and geometry. In fact, ruler and compass are like the archetypal methods of like ancient Greek geometry, right? With the first stirrings of abstract thought, of like figuring out these kind of Pythagorean like laws that seem to exist somewhere out in like a pure realm of the forms, rather than we're not just counting apples or something. We're like talking about numbers that have some pure existence independent from whether they're the number of any particular assembly of things. He inferred, he deduced, right? Scientific reasoning. He scrutinized the fall of an apple. That's Newton watching the apple fall and thinking of the theory of gravity, realizing that maybe it was the same force that pulled the apple off the tree and to the ground that also keeps the moon in its orbit around the Earth. The twisting of metal orbs hanging from a thread. That's skipping ahead a few centuries to, I think it was called the Cavendish experiment, which was to measure the strength of gravity by indeed hanging these really heavy metal spheres like in like a vacuum tank from a tiny thread that could measure twisting motion very, very precisely. And then what they would do, so they'd basically hang this barbell from like a tiny thread that was really strong, and then they would take a giant weight, like a truck full of concrete or something, and they'd park it kind of off to the side of the barbell such that one of the arms of the barbell would be closer to the truck and would be attracted by the gravitational attraction between the heavy truck and the metal. Of course, it's a tiny force because the entire Earth only exerts a force on the barbell that's still you can lift it against gravity. So the force between the barbell and a truck is going to be infinitely smaller than between a barbell and the entire Earth, but it is still measurable. And with that experiment, people were able to quantify how much gravitational attraction is produced, like, per atom, per, kilogram or something, on every other piece of matter in the universe. So yes, he was searching for the princess, and he would not stop until he found her, for he was hungry. He cut rats into pieces to examine their brains, implanted tungsten posts into the skulls of water-starved monkeys. This, first of all, illustrates, of course, Tim's kind of like obsession and willingness to, cause harm to others, even if in the name of bringing himself closer to truth. It also illustrates that this isn't just about fundamental physics, even though it is heavily about fundamental physics and the nature of time and stuff, that like all of science, and in particular, he's examining the brains of the rats and the monkeys. I'm not sure if these refer to particular experiments. I've tried to like Google tungsten posts to water-starved monkeys, but I presume that these are references to some sort of experiments or just typical model animals within neuroscience, and trying to understand nerves and the way that brains work, which gets to another theme that in particular the witness will go really deep on, which is like conscious experience, and how could it be that our subjective world of experience is like seems totally different and irreconcilable from like the physical world of atoms and stuff. It seems like we look at all of our physics theories and our understanding of the world, and it's like there's no place for like the redness of red. Like so this is like Tim is also trying to track down the scientific mystery. He's like looking at physics, looking at neuroscience, trying to kind of crack the code and get at that transcendent understanding of truth, or of like, why does the universe exist, or what is it that that explains my experience of life, or gives the meaning to life. So now we have our secret text here, which we can activate but cannot read. Or can we? Yeah, no, we've got to be in some special place. Okay, so we have rewound because what we got to do here is come down here, activate the book, and then we can go up here. The book stays activated because it has those little green sparkles around it, and then we can hide behind this pillar here. Ghostly, she stood in front of him and looked into his eyes. "I'm here," she said. "I'm here. I want to touch you." She pleaded, "Look at me." But he would not see her. He only knew how to look at the outsides of things. So this is a really nice secret text bit because for a couple of reasons. I've used the phrase "he only knew how to look at the outsides of things" a lot of times in this series because it is condemning the materialistic, reductionistic approach that Tim has to everything. He's like going after all of this scientific knowledge, but he's missing something. And it's not just like, oh, Tim, like, you need an institutional review board because you cut too many rats' brains into pieces or something. It's a like that's a problem with his personality, but also he's just has a totally wrong approach that I've talked about of just going for these external facts and not being connected to his own experience, or being kind of blind to, in a way, the closest ways in which we're connected to the mystery and nature of existence. So that's why she's ghostly. She's standing right in front of him, but he can't see her in the same way that everyday experience, and maybe perhaps the kind of like truth of enlightenment, or the like imminence of our intimate connection with reality, they're kind of like they're here in every moment, just like someone standing right in front of you, but they're like unrecognizable, or we've somehow forgotten them or can't recognize them, like we're just looking right through it at every moment. All right. He scrutinized the fall of an apple, the twisting of metal orbs hanging from a thread. Through these clues he would find the princess, see her face. After an especially fervent night of tinkering, he kneeled behind a bunker in the desert. He held a piece of welder's glass up to his eyes and waited. On that moment hung eternity. Time stood still. Space contracted to a pinpoint. It was as though the earth had opened and the skies split. One felt as though he had been privileged to witness the birth of the world. Someone near him said, "It worked." Someone else said, "Now we are all sons of bitches." So this is that atomic bomb reference. It's starting off scrutinizing the fall of an apple, twisting in metal orbs, connecting to the earlier physics experiment, right? So this is like the culmination of all of this stuff. He's putting together the theories of gravity and quantum mechanics, slowly kind of getting closer and closer to this like final theory. And the just in the way that the completion of the some of the theories of quantum mechanics enabled the understanding of radiation and nuclear physics well enough to create the atomic bomb. So then this is replaying some scenes from the Trinity nuclear test, which was the first nuclear test conducted by, in the world, and it was put on by the scientists of the Manhattan Project as they were racing to develop the bomb in total secrecy in the New Mexico desert in the middle of World War II. So kneeling behind a bunker in the desert, holding up a piece of welder's glass. That might specifically be a thing from I guess everyone was wearing welder's glass. In Feynman's book, Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman, he has a bit where he recounts his experience of being at the Trinity test. And he talks about how everyone was wearing this these like welder's masks that were so darkened because they knew that the bomb was going to be exceedingly bright, and they were worried that they were all just going to go blind. And they were all kind of standing there. They couldn't see a thing because, of course, it was like 4 a.m. so there's no light, and you're just staring out into the desert in darkness. And Feynman gets sick of it. He wants to see the action, and so he takes off the welder's glass and then hops into a truck. Not because he wants to go anywhere, but because he wants to look through just the ordinary glass, because he knows that ordinary glass is, although it's transparent to a narrow band of visible light, it's actually not transparent. It's opaque to a lot of a reasonable amount of the infrared spectrum, and it's also opaque to ultraviolet light, which is why you don't get you're not nearly as easily sunburned if you're like driving the car and if you have sun shining on you from behind glass as you are if you're just having sun shining on you with nothing in between. So he's sitting there and he's thinking, well, the regular glass will be opaque enough that it will defend me from the the blinding gamma rays and whatever, which might not pass safety review today. But anyway, so he makes this claim in the book that he was like the only one who really saw the instant of the Trinity explosion because everyone else was wearing this welder's glass that was like too dark or something. But I don't know if that was true. I imagine that the people wearing welder's glass were also able to see the explosion just fine. So this quote, though, is not from Feynman, that italicized bit, and note it's in italics, and then it has a little 1 on it. I think maybe if you go to the credits of the game, then it'll eventually cite that as coming from some particular I think it's from a news report from a reporter who was embedded with the Manhattan Project, and obviously he wasn't allowed to publish anything because it's totally top secret, but after the conclusion of the war, they even in the war's final days, whatever, they started to, after the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they started to put out some information about the atomic bomb so that people could understand what was going on, and they revealed that they had been running this huge secret project that was consuming a multiple percent of US GDP at the time just for the Manhattan Project. Yeah, so this was from quoted from an article series of Pulitzer Prize winning won the 1946 Pulitzer Prize for a series of 10 articles about the development of the atomic bomb, with headlines like "Drama of the Atomic Bomb Found Climax in July 16 Test," or "Atomic Bomb Based on Einstein Theory," "Engineering Vision in Atomic Project," "Plutonium Lifted by New Chemistry," and so on and so forth. So I think he's recounting in one of these stories the Trinity test. He talks about the drama of the countdown, 0 - 10 seconds. A green flare flashed out through the clouds, descended slowly, opened, grew dim, and vanished into the darkness. The voice from the clouds boomed out again, 0 - 3 seconds. So that counts down to 0. And just at the instant there arose from the bowels of the earth a light not of this world, the light of many suns in one. It was a sunrise such as the world had never seen, a great green super sun, climbing in a fraction of a second to a height of more than 8,000 feet, rising ever higher until it touched the clouds, lighting up earth and sky all around with a dazzling luminosity. Up it went, a great ball of fire about a mile in diameter, changing colors as it kept shooting upward, from deep purple to orange, expanding, growing bigger, rising as it was expanding, an elemental force freed from its bonds after being chained for billions of years. For a fleeting instant, the color was unearthly green, such as one sees only in the corona of the sun during a total eclipse. It was as though the earth had opened and the skies split, so then it goes, then we get these quotes. You quote another couple of people. Another observer said that it was the nearest thing to doomsday one could possibly imagine, and so on and so forth. So you guys can check that in the rest of that article if you want. It worked, I think, is a quote from Oppenheimer, who is often misquoted as saying, I have become death, destroyer of worlds. He wrote in like a letter, I guess we'll all learn about this because Christopher Nolan, maker of the movie Tenet, is also making a movie about Oppenheimer. But he wrote a letter that said, like, at the time I thought, and then inserted this like super pretentious line from Hindu scripture. But eyewitnesses who were standing around Oppenheimer at the time, who was super stressed out because he was like leading this giant secret project upon which like multiple percentage of GDP and the whole future of the Cold War and the World War II and everything depended on, just said it worked and felt super kind of relieved and that everything is over. And then I don't know who said, now we're all sons of bitches, but that was also a quote from someone who's there and is a reference to the idea that the scientists who were just like working feverishly on the bomb, excited by the possibility of it, never really realized even the kind of geopolitical implications that it would have. It was like this famous kind of lapse of introspection or judgment. I mean, some of the scientists earlier who had known about the possibility of the bomb, like Enrico Fermi or Einstein, who sent the letter to the White House, they had kind of wondered, like, maybe we should just keep this knowledge secret among us and never reveal to the world the possibility of the atomic bomb. But that was like very short-lived because, of course, multiple people would realize that it was possible. But during the working on the Manhattan Project, there seemingly was like very little discussion about like the morality of using the weapons or how it would change warfare or whether it would end humanity or whatnot. And that was a famous kind of like failure of thoughtfulness on part of the scientists who, which fueled a lot of disillusionment with science and technology in the decades after the war. Now I think we have this clever trick to get the princess's take on events, but we have to hide behind this. But there's no way to get out of here without flipping one of those books. But there is a panel that turns you green out here in the next room. So we're gonna go here and then rewind a bit until we hear the book open. All right, that should be good. Sweet. She stood tall and majestic. She radiated fury. She shouted, "Who has disturbed me?" But then, anger expelled, she felt the sadness beneath. She let her breath fall softly, like a sigh, like ashes floating gently on the wind. She couldn't understand why he chose to flirt so closely with the death of the world. So, of course, this is the princess as the spirit of nature and of the fundamental physics, and as, in this case, the atomic bomb herself, right? So she's standing tall and majestic like the mushroom cloud towering over the scientists in the desert, radiating fury. She's like the and become death, destroyer of worlds, right? Who has disturbed me? Like, she's like this primal force of the universe or something, and these like little scientists down there are like poking at her, trying to understand her reactions and things. Letting her breath fall softly like a sigh, like ashes floating gently on the wind, is like the fallout from the reaction coming downwind. Then we get kind of a crazy non sequitur line here, but it makes sense. The candy store. Everything he wanted was on the opposite side of that pane of glass. The store was decorated in bright colors, and the scents wafting out drove him crazy. He tried to rush for the door, or just get closer to the glass, but he couldn't. She held him back with great strength. Why would she hold him back? How might he break free of her grasp? He considered violence. So this is wild because the previous couple of things, we're talking about science experiments, they're talking about atomic bombs created by like the nation's greatest geniuses and people who are like understanding the fundamental things. It's all this very like highfalutin fancy stuff that like, it's kind of like high status. It's like the smartest, best people are like considering their all of these like big worldly issues, and their minds are really keen, and they're figuring out, getting in tune with the fundamental secrets of nature. And so this is like to kind of deflate that and point out that although it's all this super intelligent stuff that's going on, the emotional urges behind this are very simple. They're like childlike, they're immature. This almost seems like kind of hard to follow without the secret text to explain what's going on here. But this is really, this screen is like more important in my view than the previous paragraph, because it really defines the real relationship between Tim and the princess, right? Previously, it's been this romantic thing. It's like, hey, I'm going to meet her kind of as an equal, hopefully, even though she's like this godlike transcendent being who's going to complete me, and I'm just like this guy who stomps on Goombas. But then in the previous screen, we got like her as this like radiant, god figure, like destroyer of worlds, like brighter than 1,000 suns. And now we have her as this kind of like motherly figure who is just taking Tim as like a little baby, and she's like watching over him, and keeping him out of the candy store, and he just wants like the treats, right? Like he's, this is not like a super sophisticated aspiration for enlightenment or something, or like a detailed thought through plan. He just like wants to acquire the stuff in the way that a young child is just kind of like a bundle of desires. They had been here before on their daily walks. She didn't mind his screams and his shrieks, or the way he yanked painfully on her braid to make her stop. He was too little to know better. She picked him up and hugged him. "No, baby," she said. He was shaking. She followed his gaze toward the treats sitting on pillows behind the glass. The chocolate bar and the magnetic monopole, the it from bit and the ethical calculus, and so many other things deeper inside. "Maybe when you're older, baby," she whispered, setting him back on his feet and leading him home. "Maybe when you're older." Every day thereafter, as before, she always walked him on a route that passed in front of the candy store. So it kind of reveals what's going on in the super crazy non sequitur text that we were looking at earlier. We get we also get the story that like this is beyond just the atomic bomb. It's beyond just having the final theory of physics. Even it like goes to something deeper, right? So the chocolate bar is like literally just a sweet thing that a baby would want. A magnetic monopole is a hypothesized particle that probably does not exist, but if we ever discovered magnetic monopoles, like in the Large Hadron Collider or something, they would, this is like a particle which has only a magnetic positive charge rather than having a magnetic field with both positive and negative. But it'd be like discovering a magnetic version of the electron, something that's like only magnetic positive or only magnetic negative, rather than averaging out to zero. And that would help us complete a total theory of physics, and just push further in our understanding of the natural world. The it from bit idea is more of a metaphysical idea about the fact that it's like looking at the universe maybe being fundamentally like built from information, like it represents matter and the material world, and bits are the unit of information, which we're familiar. We usually think of bits as they're the abstract thing that's built on top of the physical world, right? Like computers contain bits, but they are made of physical transistors and, you know, batteries and all these electronic components that are made up of like real atoms of silicon and gold and whatever. But there's all these properties of physical law that seem like they're like information based, like the idea of entropy has all these kind of parallels with information theory, and some people think that the limits on things like the how small the radius of a white dwarf can be, or you know, the properties of black holes and stuff might be constrained by like the amount of quantum information that has accrued in all of the little particles that are in the you know, in those objects. So I'm not super clear on the details of it, but it from bit refers to like having a metaphysical solution that explains all of the physical world on some even deeper level than a perfect theory of physics, but on the level of kind of getting at hopefully trying to explain existence itself and like why there's something rather than nothing. The ethical calculus, of course, refers to like utilitarianism basically, and trying to the ways in which you would tally up the pros and cons of decisions, then the consequences of actions, be able to predict the future, be able to appropriately value all of the different experiences and consequences that an action might create, and thus like make all the right decisions in life, which is something we all wish that we could do. And always know what was the right thing to do in any dilemma. If you were able to kind of like solve morality and realize what the real meaning of life would be, like you would have to realize the purpose of life in order to realize like what you should do in life. So this is kind of like a moral and personal dimension of like maybe there is some theory not just of like physics or existence, but of like literally how I should live, and there's like a correct way to be in the universe that I could figure out, and then it would create this like transcendent experience where I would just be able to like follow the law and it would lead to this perfect world. And then so many other things deeper inside, getting even at deeper and more fundamental mysteries of consciousness and things like that. Maybe when you're older, baby, she whispers, maybe when you're older. So this is a reflection not just of Tim's mindset and experience, but of the situation that we are all in, or that at least like Jonathan Blow and myself and other people who would like to have perfect ethical theories and final theories of physics are in, where we as humanity are, you know, as far as our civilization has come, that we now understand all these amazing things about our world, but we still seem equally distant from a final state where we like have answers to these questions. Maybe there aren't any answers, or there, I mean, there must kind of be answers, but like maybe they're just doomed to never be accessible to us in, you know, given our perspective in the universe or the way that our minds are built or something. So we're all in this situation where we're living in this world of mystery. You know, we're kind of like we're born and we die and we don't really understand what's going on in the meantime. And we're in this civilization that has this advancing knowledge. And so we kind of can see that like maybe someday someone will get to have this amazing experience of like being enlightened and having it all figured out and like understanding their place in the world. But like it probably won't be us because we're still young and civilization is still young and we haven't gotten there yet. Just like how people in the 1600s or something couldn't have hoped to understand the final theories and stuff because they didn't even know about electricity or whatnot. To contrast this Braid with the Witness is much more, it's kind of maybe made peace with that fact that building the understanding of the universe and the final perspective is a collaborative civilizational project. But Braid is, you know, Tim is very individualistic, and this is an introspective game about one's own personal experience. And so from Braid's perspective, this is like devastating to realize that like I won't be the one, you know, or like I'm being told to wait and I don't know how long. And so we're told every day thereafter, as before, she always walked home on a route that passed in front of the candy store. Like, life is always tantalizing us with the fact that there are these unexplained things, with the fact that we don't have the answers to this stuff, or that there are these deficiencies that we can't get around. And it's like, why? Why is life like that? We don't know. It's inexplicable. It's the behavior of, in the story of Braid, this sort of godlike spirit of the universe, the princess. Like, why is she choosing to do that? Maybe it helps him mature in some way, or maybe, who knows? Or more likely, she has her own ways, right? Like, the universe doesn't care about us, and this is probably just like the most convenient walking route, like, between her home and the park or something, and like, she's not going to go another way just because this little creature is like bothered by what happens along the route, right? So anyways, that's that screen, which I think is the penultimate screen in Braid's epilogue, and more informative and evocative in my view than the previous one about the atomic bomb. So now we get to this final screen. Interestingly, the previous areas had like all this stuff on the roof. There's just this little bar. I guess it stops this thing from like colliding with the roof, and whatever. But it seems like things kind of open up. There's all these like ruins. The imagery of this world, it's like everything's been tossed about. Stuff is literally upside down. It's like all the stuff of the different world has a very more now than ever vibe, where we all of the different elements of the story and stuff, it's just like totally discombobulated. And of course, famously, I'm going through being like, wow, it makes so much sense, like all of this stuff, and it's all supporting these themes. But like stuff about candy store, stuff about water-starved monkeys, birth of the world, like twisting orbs on a thread, it's just like weird stuff. And each one is more esoteric than the last, right? So like the very first one is just kind of like, don't be sexist. And the relevance to the princess story is kind of clear. And then we get this one about like water-starved monkeys and looking for clues and stuff. But at least it mentions the princess. She's like, okay, he's looking for the princess by doing experiments. And then we get this atom bomb text, which everybody talks about on the internet precisely because it doesn't make sense on the first read if you don't happen to know these pretty obscure references. Like, this isn't even the quote, the Oppenheimer quote that everybody knows about, now I am become death. This is like a quote from this article from 1946 that nobody's really read anymore. So this is just like, people are just reading this, they're just like, what the hell's going on? And then you get this crazy candy store one, which didn't even make sense to me when I played Braid, because I didn't know about the secret text until, like, it only makes sense if you like can unlock the secret text, and otherwise it's just like, absolutely what the hell. So it gets more and more confusing, and there's like no attempt to help the player out here. Like, it's just, the game's just throwing weird stuff at you, which is an interesting contrast to, I guess, the experience of the end of the game, which is like this revelatory thing that it's very clear that like, oh, the princess is running away from me, maybe I'm a bad person instead of a good person. It's maybe unclear how to think about that, or like what to take away from that, or what Tim did wrong. But it's this big twist ending revelation, versus here it's like, instead of hitting you with like easily digestible like big plot twist, it's giving you like this escalating series of like really confusing literary references, and just trying to make everything kind of muddled up. This is like the opposite of, because Tim, just after he encounters the princess, which he has been hoping for to be this transcendent moment, but it's actually this big kind of like letdown and sort of thing that undermines his sense of himself and makes him feel like, maybe I've been a bad person all along. In that afterwards, he's like feeling like, oh, maybe I need to reevaluate everything, or like, just like, where did I go wrong? Like, there's all of this muddled different stuff coming together, and maybe also there's kind of a falling apart of the different themes and stuff. So anyways, you see this with The Witness too. People will like be confused, and then they'll think that being confused is like the theme of the game and is like what the game means, is that like, oh, it's about how postmodernism doesn't make any sense or something. And as I've been saying, I'm like, no, this stuff does make sense. But it is also true, just like I've been saying earlier, there's like the player's first time experience, and then there's another layer, which is kind of like the experience that you get when you've like considered everything and kind of put it together and drawn all the connections and stuff, is different from the narrative that you get as you go through and just like encounter it for the first time. But so there's definitely like this deliberate attempt to kind of just make things like confused and muddled and mixed up, which is sort of it's almost like coming out of the really hot tub and then diving into like the icy cold pool, or vice versa, where you get this shock of going from the one environment to the other. So you go from the concentrated like high grade dose of like insight, of like curated insight designed to make you feel like you're understanding everything and the pieces are all coming together, to all of the text of this epilogue, which is like designed to be like maximally confusing and just make you think like, what is going on? Like, this doesn't make any sense. I'm so lost. But then finally we get to this last screen, which is a merciful screen in Braid. We don't have any crazy ruins in the background. It's like open. There's just clouds and stuff. And Braid is going to not just leave us with this kind of like devastating conclusion of like, guess what, like there's no God and we don't get to figure out the answers to the universe until we die, and or like it's going to be figured out long after we die, so our lives are just going to be lived in confusion. That's like kind of a main takeaway, but it tries to temper this because it's like, hey Tim, like, bad news, there isn't the enlightenment that you've been seeking. There isn't that moment of transcendence because you've been going about it in the wrong way. But one of the good news is maybe you could find it in some other way if you go about it very differently and stuff. And for more on that, see The Witness. And then another lesson is like, other piece of good news, maybe you don't need one big concentrated mega moment like an atomic explosion to illuminate a lifetime. Maybe you can build up a lifetime bit by bit from all of these different mini moments, and you can create a bigger structure like that, just like how Braid, the video game, is not really built around one key idea. I mean, it's built around the idea of rewinding, but it's more like a bunch of different things and themes and artwork and stuff that all comes together into a cohesive whole. He cannot say he's understood all of this, meaning the whole game, but especially the crazy epilogue text that we just read. Possibly he's more confused now than ever. If you want to get more confused now than ever, you can play my Braid mod, More Now Than Ever. The name, of course, coming from this exact line because it has that same theme of just adding more layers and mixing things up, and trying to add complexity. But all these moments he's contemplated, something has occurred. The moments feel substantial in his mind, like stones, right? Stones is not nothing. It's also not an immortal crystal palace that'll, where we can live forever in peace. But it's like something real, something you might want to hold on to if you're feeling like there's some kind of existential crisis going on, and like maybe there's no truth that you'll ever be able to find or something. It's like, no, I have at least this thing. Kneeling, reaching down towards the closest one, running his hand across it, he finds it smooth and slightly cold. Again, like concrete imagery. He tests the stone's weight. He finds he can lift it, and the others too. It's not like some kind of crazy infinite thing that's beyond the wall of paradise. He can fit them together to create a foundation, an embankment, a castle. So here the flag goes up just like in all the previous worlds. And for once it's a happy green flag. It's not like some kind of crazy naval signal telling me to like go back and give up and, abandon all hope ye who enter here. Of course, these blocks are the very icons that we've been seeing in each level. So each of these blocks represents one of the levels in Braid. The early, this is World 2, World 2 is the green over there because there's only 4 of those, and then World 3 and 4. Up top are in the purple is World 6 probably, and then in the red are is World 5. The blue is the the ending stuff. You see the flower opening over time, and then this funny kind of like this flower is pointing down, and then this gray one that I'm standing on right now is, of course, the text for the epilogue, right, with the books and coffee shelves and everything kind of flying around in midair, which is this wonderful like meta moment of self-referentiality, because when we're standing on the epilogue block reading this book, it's like we're in the epilogue. Like this is our exact moment in time. That, you know, there's a bunch of books and movies and stuff that have made jokes about this. Like you're reading a book of your future history and you pinpoint the exact moment in the book when you're reading it. That was in like Gabriel Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude, and there's I think there's a movie in like Spaceballs. They get a video recording of the movie and they like fast forward to the point in the movie where they're at. So anyways, this is just an awesome little joke, but also a joke that resituates ourselves in the present moment, right? It's like you're here right now, you know? It's like this instant is what's happening. And with all these fun little kind of like radiative glow coming off the book, which also looks like it's coming off of Tim. It's like, you know, this is what's happening right now, and not some kind of crazy, you know, abstract world of castles and princesses or, you know, gods or fundamental physics or things like that. To build a castle of appropriate size, he will need a great many stones, but what he's got now feels like an acceptable start. So this, again, I interpret as kind of a merciful attitude of Braid, of not, it's not like everything's hopeless. It's, you know, but it's also not, he's not just going to take the royal road to geometry and find some kind of amazing crystal palace waiting for him in some kind of like brilliant all-in-one illuminating moment. Instead, he'll, you know, but maybe he can put together a home, an understanding of life, living the good life, you know, trying to understand his place in the universe that isn't some kind of final, super intelligent, like, you know, immortal contemplation being answer, but is like enough in some kind of deep philosophical sense. So here we have our castle, and then over here, of course, there's like more blocks, right? Like there's more things waiting to be learned. It's like life goes on. There's more experience. There's like future stones that'll be uncovered and can be incorporated into this design over time. Again, feeling like playing some more Braid and getting some more awesome puzzles you can play more now than ever. I love the cute patterning up here where they use the icons for the pit, that recurring first level in Braid, to make the crenellations on top of the castle wall. And then this cloud is here, apparently the subject of many conspiracy theories early on about like, oh, maybe this cloud just takes like 100 hours to move across the screen or something. But Jonathan Blow has said, no, it's like symbolic. It's like he wanted to, you know, you can stand up here on the castle and kind of look around and stuff, but the cloud gives you even an extra feeling of like a little bit of accomplishment of being able to stand up somewhere and, you know, survey be able to look down and see the things that you've done, right? You're like looking down on your past and on everything and being able to have a greater perspective on it rather than being lost on the ground floor. Hard to portray in a 2D game as opposed to a 3D game, but that reinforces the sense of kind of like something accomplished, even though it's a big mix and there's been a big disappointment and you don't get this big you know, existential boon that you're hoping for, but you know, reinforces also the kind of overview that you get here, seeing all the level icons laid out, that gives you a kind of overview of the whole game. So now we're booted out here into this funny little maintenance area, and that is Braid. And that is it also for our series, Untangling Braid. Although in a few weeks I will have another video up with the conclusion to my even more pretentious mod for the game, Braid more now than ever. And I'll be continuing the Examining the Witness series and maybe some other games too if things go well. You can find a survey in the video description where you can suggest other topics that you might want to see me tackle in future videos if I ever get around to them, and provide other kinds of feedback. But for now, thank you so much for accompanying me on this journey of analysis of one of my favorite games. Definitely consider actually sharing this video with real people that you actually know. Next time you see somebody saying the princess is the atomic bomb, you can say, no, she isn't. She's actually like this bigger thing about, scientific knowledge and enlightenment, and you can give them the link to this video. If you hear somebody saying Braid is pretentious, you can be like, yes, it's amazing. Check out this video where you can explore every pretentious detail of this masterpiece game. So I encourage you to share this with folks if you find it useful. I hope you have enjoyed this journey together. If you're watching this first as the kind of intro summary video like I talked about, I also have a whole series where I go world by world and I talk about each of the puzzles and kind of like the interesting mechanics of what each puzzle teaches you, and analyze the text and art of each room in Braid. Have a good time out there. Go forth, try to learn new things about the world, pursue truth, but don't be too single-minded like Tim. Always keep your eyes open for unexpected new sources of wisdom, and enjoy the experience of life. So thanks, and I will see you in the future, hopefully, on this channel.